Backcountry Trailbreakers.
Hey!
Thanks for being here with me today. I'm so excited to interview you today and to just hear all of your different perspectives on the outdoors and just where we're at and where we can go to build a more inclusive and diverse and intersectional future in the outdoors. So thanks for sharing time with me today.
Thank you.
It's an honor to interview y'all. My first question to kick it off, Ron,
Woo!
how does it feel to be so pretty?
Oh!
Tell us.
It's a burden, just say it.
Kareemah, I have a question for you.
What?
You are so confident and so beautiful. What is a pro life tip you have for me to teach me how to be more confident in my everyday life?
It's like I mantra myself into believing that I can do or be. And so I even constantly have to remind myself that I am. And so I'm just, when I come into the space, you know, I have a lot of intersectionalities. You know, I'm larger than the average woman. I'm a person with a disability. I don't have a lot of the formal education some people have. I didn't grow up the same way. And so I often feel like the only one of myself in a room. And so instead of kind of trying to blend in, I just kind of hold on to the things that make me unique and expand them. And then I say, this is freaking amazing. None of them can be this or is this. And so I am it. And so, and then I add SH in front of it.
I love it. Ron, can you tell us a little bit more about how you kind of got into this work and what's your why when it comes to doing work to diversify the outdoors?
I never forget one of the things that helped me transition and come back from that sabbatical was the words of a counselor who actually wrote my recommendation letter to start, you know, guiding, you know, and go out there into the world. She said, whatever you go out there and learn, make sure you bring it back. And when I remembered those words, you know, years later, it's like, all right, well, I now have to go and help students or people who may have been in the same position I was in, looking for these different opportunities, but didn't have access to them. So yeah, full circle moment. Yeah.
Does that resonate with anyone else?
Yeah, I feel like it's so similar to me because me getting into mountain biking was this like super serendipitous thing. Like growing up in Oklahoma, we had some jumps in our backyard and stuff like that and I rode with my brother, but I never even knew what a mountain bike was. And then moved out to California. It just so happened that some bicycle jumps that we built, somebody came down there, I met him, like became friends with him. He convinced me to go to Whistler, which is like a really big biking destination. He happened to be into World Cup racing and showed me all these videos. And it's like, if I wouldn't have met like that one person, then like I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And I think that, you know, everyone kind of has that moment, but I think a lot of the times it's a little bit less serendipitous where it's like a friend or parent or like it's in the culture or the kid down the street or whatever, you know, and like in my sphere, there was no one like that. And so just like Ron was talking about where it feels like now this like full circle moment where it's like, like I went out, I raced, you know, I traveled the world and stuff like that. And like, what does it mean for me to make it less serendipitous for the next person? So that like somebody can just happen on that, you know, find the bike, you know, a lot easier than I did.
Juju, I have a question for you. Tell me about like your why and how you got started in like the outdoors for you and kind of how it became your full-time life's work.
Yeah, sort of after just finishing university, I wanted to go into politics. I wanted to be a diplomat.
Really?
But then I spent some time in Germany, Poland, studying the Holocaust, the Middle East, and I working a lot with the Syrian refugee in 2015 during the Syrian crisis, and realized that that is not my passion. I can't play political games. I'm just very like straightforward kind of person. And that space just wasn't good for me emotionally. So I just took some time off, worked at a coffee shop downtown Vancouver, was meeting amazing people, and people were coming, traveling, and I would just invite them on hikes. You know, as a way of connecting, because Vancouver is a very isolating city. It's really hard to connect with people. So for me, I was just like, hey, this is just a way of me connecting with people and just understanding their lived experience and why they're traveling. And the more I was spending time outside, I noticed there was a huge difference between the people I was seeing on the trails versus how marketing and advertisement work for a lot of the major brands that are in Vancouver. So there wasn't diversity of body, there wasn't diversity of color, there was just like, you know, very white people doing these things. And for me, I found that was kind of like, hey, there's a problem here, because when I'm backpacking, when I'm in these spaces, I see a diversity of people in those spaces. Like, how come their stories and their lived experience are not being highlighted or showcased? And I took some time, because I am a history and poli-sci major, did my own kind of like market assessment, research, read a lot of books on the subject matter before even forming Call of the Trails, because I wanted it to be at a place of actually understanding the need of the community versus assuming there's a need in the community.
Agnes, I have a question for you. What made you realize that change was needed in the outdoors, especially in the work you do with maintaining a lot of the backcountry for us and maintaining trails and people's access to the outdoors? Kind of what was the impetus for you to say, okay, we need to change this up, we need to diversify this space?
Well, thinking with the last question, like, what's my why? And for this, like, when did I realize there needed to be change? And for me, there wasn't necessarily like, oh, this happened and now I want to work for this. There wasn't like some aha moment or like a specific point. Because the opportunities that I've had all led to the next opportunity. And so after graduating from school and then doing an AmeriCorps program and then working for the National Park Service, which then filled my winters to work at a resort, all of that was sort of together. And in doing that work, gradually things would be brought to my attention that I wasn't necessarily paying as much attention to when I was younger, you know? And so thinking about it later, like, I was probably selected for that AmeriCorps program based on my photo that I sent in. And if I wasn't selected, though, like, where would I be? Where would my life, you know, what would I be doing without that first opportunity that was that break to feed me into this work? And so how that's evolved in making the incremental changes that I could in those institutions that I was a part of, but they were the National Park Service or a state agency where they weren't open to, like, we can't put more than 2 boxes in this question, or we can't just change our logo or motto, and kept pushing and kept asking why. And so, you know, again, lucky enough to be able to create an organization where I could make those decisions and change it and lay the foundation that was different. And I think for all of us, it's we you know, coincidentally or not, like, we each have an affinity type program or nonprofit or thing, and because those are parts of our identities, and I didn't see that representation until like last year for me, that I saw a woman of color in a high level position at a federal agency. And so the moment that one of my participants is able to come up to me and say, like, you are my first example of that. I don't want to speak for everyone, but in each of our respective organizations, in some way, we welcome folks to our spaces in a certain way because we want that inclusion, we want them to feel welcome. And at the same time, if we don't all figure out how to do that on a wider scale together, it's not really gonna make a difference.
I think it's interesting too, like you talked about each of us having a nonprofit that is kind of core to these affinities and things like that, but a lot of the time I think about it as like it's our community, right? Like every time anyone does, so much of the stuff that we do in all of our life is like with our community, whether it's like a group of friends or like at school or all of these things. And I think that we are just trying to uplift our own communities. Like these are the people that we think of as, you know, our peers and our, you know, family and stuff like that. So I think it is interesting to think about it like that, where it's like, let's just uplift our community into these spaces that maybe like there wasn't access or people didn't have the opportunity to be in one of those high level positions, things like that.
What are you learning nowadays about how you can be the best stewards to not only the outdoors, but outdoor community and be the best allies out there? Like what are you learning? What is getting you excited? And what are you seeing is working?
we definitely want to like employ as many queer and trans instructors and mentors as possible. That's not what it's all about either. It's also about connecting learning communities across difference and like and also having that story be told. Because again, that's like, for me, I'm from a small rural town. That's actually how most of my life has been lived, for better or worse, you know. So I would say that's a big thing that we're leaning into right now. And I don't know if you want to add anything else. I know there's other, things we could pile on there.
Totally. We hold different experiences in our nervous systems when we go out into the natural world, like, or into into cities or wherever it is. We just hold like different experiences with our nervous systems. And I just feel like it's something that I just continue to apprentice to, is just like, okay, like how can we build like compassionate systems of care, like community care for one another, across difference as well as within affinity spaces, because I think, I know that you love the quote, the revolution will be relational, like it's relational to each other, the more than human world, and to ourselves and our own nervous systems and our own healing with our ancestors and with place. So that's something that I just feel like I will always apprentice to is, okay, how can we heal one another and each other and, just be in right relation with the more than human world as well.
Jose, what is something that you will always be an apprentice to when it comes to the outdoors and to learning and to being curious?
It actually aligns really well to what Pinar have said, but echoed by others. So this idea of healing severed connections and holding the spaces, as Pinar said, for trauma-informed and healing-centered. Because they're related. To me, they're slightly different because you want to be aware of the harm, right? Because without being aware of that, then your healing may be detached from that, but you also don't always want to just focus on the harm in the absence of the healing. Because, it's like that old line, like, a wound will heal, but how you pick at it doesn't help it. And so that centers me into same as both with the human and non-human relationships. And the way that I thought about that early on was as this inter and intra relational spaces, because affinity spaces can be easily misunderstood as, oh, you're excluding yourself, you're separating. Like one of the very first Facebook posts years ago when Latino Outdoors started, it's like, why Latino Outdoors? There's no white outdoors. And so there was a lot to unpack there. But then also being able to say, those affinity spaces can be helpful because you want to process some of that stuff together. And be able to be ready and supportive of the relationships with other identities, with other communities. And sometimes those are within your own community, but also so that these ideas of accompliceship and co-conspirators means something in terms of what you're weaving together. And so lastly, the apprenticeship, the great thing is it comes from my peers and colleagues.
Jaylyn, what's a little bit of your why? You founded Native Women's Wilderness, and it's an incredible organization that really uplifts and does a lot of work for the Native community, and especially women. Can you tell us some more about how things got started and what's keeping you motivated?
I grew up on the res in the Navajo Nation, and I was always doing stuff outside, like mountain biking, rock climbing, like you name it, we were probably doing it. And so I went through college and I started learning, oh, this is called bouldering, this is called chimneying, and like these are the things that I've did all my life, but we were just like, hey, let's just go play on the rocks, and it just became something deep and profound for me of our people do not exist in this space. And that really broke my heart because this is our land that was stolen and taken away from us. And then I started reading other stories like Callie and my friend Ashley and Pinar, and their stories really, especially Callie and Ashley being adopted as well and raised in white families and also not knowing their culture. And it just hit me like, there's more of me out there? Like, I thought I was it. I thought I was alone on this journey. And that just really pushed me to bring our voices together.
Where can people start? Honestly,
starting, most simple thing is, you know, supporting the organizations of these beautiful people who are, you know, sitting out here that you're talking to. We think about accessibility from both sides, and a lot of people I know, it's like, I don't know where to start, I don't know what to do, and just donating or finding a way to support our organizations, I think, is a critical first step. It's not necessarily doing the work, but it's a first step.
When we think of positive things, it's like always one single moment, right? Like I had this like 4th grade teacher that changed my life. You know, I did this thing or accomplished this one thing. Like it's always like one person that really changes everything. And so I think, you know, to kind of tie into what Ron is saying is like that one person, like, and one individual can actually change the course of like an entire path of somebody's life. Like I think of like my friend who took me out to Whistler, right? Like that was one action that changed it. And so it's like, okay, cool. Like maybe I can donate. Maybe I can like involve somebody in my community. Maybe I can help them get started. And even though you might be helping one person, like you don't know what that one person will go on to do. And so I think it's important not to get overwhelmed and think it's too big, right? Like the smallest actions almost sometimes make the biggest difference.
I feel like almost every person watching this probably has something that they're really good at and that they love to do, and that they could like maybe extend a hand to someone who hasn't really had that much experience with it or done it before. And I guarantee you will be able to find those people, like whether it's in your church community or, you know, your school or your like coworkers, you know. So I feel like that's a really big thing that I like to emphasize.
Like I think it's really important to listen, because I think sometimes we want to help people without really assessing their need. And there's something like we talked about in international development, it's sustainable development, right? You don't go into a culture and assume that you're going to save this culture from whatever is going on without taking the time to really understand the people and what the people want and need.
I mean, you're right about the listening part and the asking part. I definitely agree with that. And my mantra is, if you treat people like, because I always ask, so how do we help people with disabilities? I was like, I don't know, treat them like people. I don't need a separate entrance. I'd like to come in the front door just like you. You know, I'd like to go down the same trails as you. What you should ask me is, what do I need in order to go down the same trail as you, right?
Yeah.
You know, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
You know, don't assume, right? We've got a lot of points here that, you know, cross-pollinate into all of our communities.
Success looks like creating a space in which growth will happen, right? The blooming is being, sometimes we get too attracted to the blooming because people are like, oh, look at all the pretty flowers. Like, wow, it's like you're being so successful because da-da-da.
Look at all this stuff.
And then look at all this stuff that you're, but then the fruiting, so to me that's interesting, because the idea isn't to keep just going. It's rather, what are you creating that's going to leave other seeds that you might still be attached to, but you may have no idea, right?
Yeah.
That's Agnes saying,
could
my
float thousands of
people are
miles
going to be
away."
out there. And that's the interesting thing about success there, because often people want to know, well, how many seeds are you making? Rather than thinking, shoot, how many other fruit are going to be in that one seed? And you can't measure that, but you're confident in the work that you're doing that that's possible.
What do you feel like is one lesson that you all are learning from nature or have learned from nature?
One of the beings that I'm incredibly just delighted by, that I've learned a lot from around community care, is beavers. And there's so many things about them that I'm really inspired by, but one of the things that really brings me a lot of joy is the fact that they build lodges, which are like their homes. And they build their homes, that's like a pretty amazing, like sturdy home. And during the winter time, they actually, it never goes below freezing in their home, and they actually share their home with like a lot of different species. So like with muskrats, with frogs, like with mice, with sometimes I think insects too, like some insects will like be in there, and they're like very welcoming of them, and they're not like aggressive really. They just want to home and house beings, including their own family. Like they're very family oriented. And so they're a big role model of mine, because they care so much about community and just community care like across difference, and they just make dramatic changes to their ecosystems.
It's like in doing that for themselves, like they really help so many, and they do, in creating a refuge for themselves, they create refuges for so many other beings.
Who goes to a meadow and say you're being highly inefficient, right? Or you're functioning
You're
like
fired.
You're fired, beaver. Or
Dam is not up to
you,
code.
you missed this meeting at
Get a tail slap for
yeah,
that.
tell us that. Or even things like like a thriving desert, when people think it has its own rhythm and pace that.
Yes, I
So
love deserts.
that's one of my takeaways.
For one, rivers are, I just learned so much from rivers, but especially white water. You have the ebbs and your flows, the eddies, these safe spaces on the rivers, and these obstacles that also come up as well. And being a guide when you're whitewater rafting, something that I quickly picked up is when people say point positive. So you're not going to say, oh, and don't go left, there's a giant rock and you may get pinned and all this is. You're trying to communicate that over running water, roaring water at that. And people's like, left? Okay, I'll go left. So, pointing positive, you get straight to the solution. I feel like as humans, we have evolved to do what's easiest. And most time what's easiest is just talking about a problem,
Right, don't
rather
do
than
that.
being,
Yeah.
don't do this, rather than just being solution oriented.
Yeah.
So I taken away from pointing positive to be more specific and solution based. And so that's just something that, I like to share.
I want to thank y'all so much for sharing your knowledge here today and for just being a part of this little meadow together. I feel like together we know so much, and you all are such an amazing example of that. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your knowledge and your brilliance and your joy with us. It has been a joy. We love you, Backcountry Trailbreakers. Thank you so much.
love you.
Thank you.
Can we hug you right now?